back, relax, and maybe get yourself a snack. Me and you gonna have a little chat about books. Hey guys, so I'm here today to do a double book review for you guys, and both these books were recommended very highly to me by Mercedes from Mercy's Bookish Musings, and they are The Inconvenient Indian, A Curious Account of the Native People in North America, which is by Thomas King, and then this one is Sufficient Grace by Amy Espeseth, and this was in the Moth Box, which is a subscription service provided by Mercedes. You get 2 books every time you get one, and they are books that she has really enjoyed by independent publishers. This was the first one of the Moth Box books I actually read, and I loved it. So I'm going to start off with this one, The Inconvenient Indian. This one she recommended on her channel quite a few months ago, I think. She picked it up because she wanted to learn a little bit more about the native cultures from America, and I basically know nothing or knew nothing about different native people in America and the history of the natives. I was very ignorant of it. I didn't know about it at all. I didn't really have any preconceived judgments, but I did have the idea of like stereotypes of native Indians wearing lots of headdresses and getting dressed up. Like, that is a stereotype that I think a lot of people, when they think of Native Indians, Native American people, then they do have that stereotype, and that's kind of all I knew. And I knew that from things like Peter Pan and, you know, really stereotyped things. So going into this, I was very curious about what I would find. I didn't know if it was going to be quite heavy or if it would be quite light. It's kind of a satirical comedy on the history of Native Indians, and it's told through the point of view of a Native Indian. Thomas King actually is part of the Native Indian community, and he's grown up within that, and he's done a lot of research into the histories behind it, the ways that people have developed, the cultures, and sort of everything to do with it, really. So he goes through different phases in the book talking about different subject areas to do with these people, and it's a really interesting introduction. I do think there's a lot more out there than this book, but I think as an introduction it gave me a good grounding in what history says is true and what is really true. And it talked a lot about the relationship between the government in America and the people who live in reservations, the people who are moved off of reservations, have their land taken away. There's a lot to do with brokering deals between the native people and the ruling government at the time, and there's a lot to do with education and miseducation, people being misrepresented, inferring the wrong things. Basically, there's a whole big miscommunication between a lot of the people in this book, and it talks about specific people who have gone down in legend. So we see things like the famous Native Indians who fought back against the white people in the historical wars and the things and the battles that they had. We see massacres. There's a lot of talk about massacres in this, mostly to the Indians, but there are some where the Indians have been the ones who attacked. It's definitely a really enlightening book. I think it opened my eyes to a lot of issues that I didn't know were there, and it opened my eyes to a lot of things that I just didn't know about the culture. It was really fascinating in that I just learned a lot from it, but I will say it's a pretty dense book. So if you want a light-hearted read, it's not going to be this one. It's quite heavy on the facts, it's quite heavy on the dates, it's quite heavy on the topics that it covers. It's not afraid to sort of go into the darker topics. So if you like all of that, then you'll probably enjoy it, but if you struggle with that, I think it is slightly more difficult than your average read. However, with that said, I would definitely recommend it, and I definitely enjoyed this the whole way through. I found it quite gripping because as I say, I knew nothing about it, so it was always really interesting to me. But there is a lot of focus on the negatives because unfortunately the history of Native people in America and Canada, this covers Canada too, is not necessarily positive for them most of the time. Not always, but most of the time it's not really been a positive history for them. So it is quite negative at times, and unfortunately it can be a little bit downheartening and sad, and I think that comes with the territory of being a small race taken over by a very big one, and I found it fascinating. So I ended up giving this a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I would definitely recommend it. I do think it was a very solid read the whole way through,
and I really enjoyed learning a lot more whilst I was reading this. That is the main thing. I think his writing style definitely appeals to the masses, even though it's quite a dense thing to cover and quite a heavy thing to cover. He does it very well. So 3.5 stars for that one. Moving on to fiction rather than non-fiction. This is Amy Espesett's Sufficient Grace, and it is a fictional book, and it's following a young girl called Ruth and her cousin who is called Naomi. They grew up in this very rural part of America. They live with their family and they all attend church on a very regular basis, and essentially it's almost like they have their own sort of family religion that everyone that they know and that they live with attends. It's sort of run by their uncle, Ruth's uncle, which is Naomi's adopted father. She was adopted into the family. And we basically follow these two young girls. I think they're about 11, 13, something between there. So they're quite young and they've sort of grown up in this community. The fear of God is very real in their lives. They definitely believe in God. They definitely believe that they will be punished if they do anything sinful, if they do anything with malicious intent, they will go to hell. And that is something that's very much instilled in them from the very beginning. And we follow these two girls as they get into not necessarily trouble, but trouble finds them. They are subjected to some things that they could never really anticipate. There is rape in this book. It is not gone into in detail at all, but it's definitely present and it's a large theme within the book. And unfortunately there's a lot of death and a lot of sadness within this book, but it's beautiful. The writing style is beautiful in this book, and that's the thing that I think most appealed to me. When I first started reading it, I opened up the pages. It was just beautifully written. It's lyrical, it has a lovely sense of cold, dark winters and hunts through the snow. It's definitely got that rural countryside feeling because the family do a lot of hunting. They hunt for their own meat and they find dead animals and they basically live in the sticks, so there's no real police presence, there's not really a town nearby, they just kind of have to fend for themselves. Following Ruth and her family through the different months, it's really interesting to see how she kind of connects death to heaven and hell and God. It's a deeply religious book, but it doesn't feel preachy, which is really good. I don't like reading books that feel like they're preaching at you, but I do like reading books where people are interested in a religion or convinced by a religion, because I find it very fascinating. I myself am not religious, but I find religious people and religious doctrine really interesting. So in terms of that, it was fascinating. In terms of the writing, it was beautiful. In terms of the story, I thought it had some really great moments and twists, and I genuinely just found myself smiling and feeling sympathy for these characters a lot of the time whilst reading it. And I think that's always really important when you're giving out a good rating, that you have to kind of connect with those characters, and I did with this. It did take me a little bit to first get into, but it was quite quick once I got into it, and I just kept wanting to read back and back. So I think I read this in about a day and a half. I just read it on the bus and read it when I was at lunch break, and then read it when I came home in the evening, and then read it the next morning as well. And I would definitely recommend this. I loved it. So for my first Mothbox book to get a 4.5 stars, which is what I gave this, I'm super happy and very impressed, and I will definitely be checking out all the others I've got in the Mothbox so far very soon. But this one just really was up my alley completely. If you like anything to do with small cliquey cults and religious orders and sort of hush secrets, and definitely things being swept away when they perhaps should be spoken about, all of those things are very present themes in this book, and I would definitely recommend it. So fabulous. 4.5 stars for this one, 3.5 for this. I always trust Mercedes, she gives me great recommendations, and I'm sure many of you already watch her and agree. So if you are interested in either of these books, do let me know in the comments which one you might be picking up and which one appeals to you more. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you very soon in another video. Bye!
Thank you for watching my video today. Go pick up a book, then come back and chat with me again.